Well, good afternoon, good evening, and good night if you are going to bed at this time. Anyways, this is Pastor Jared France from Shield Apologetics, sharing his identity, evidentially leading doubters. We have a wonderful talk this evening. I have the honor and the privilege to host a debate discussion talk this evening. And so we're going to have a wonderful discussion about sin. We're going to see if sin exists. Does it exist? How do we talk to people about sin? What if sin doesn't exist? What does that do to us? And then we're going to get into all that. So don't worry. We're going to hit some really tough topics. And I'm going to have to really jump in the middle here of these guys because I'm just going to afraid they're just going to attack each other. So I'm really, really nervous right now, but we'll find out how well it goes. So
Let me at him.
what we have tonight is one of my very, very good friends. He was on my first podcast with him a couple weeks ago. My very good friend, the Faithiest Atheist, with us tonight. And then we also have my new friend I just met, and he meets the sarcasm with the Faithiest Atheist and myself just right on the money. So much so that his page is the William Meme Craig page, and so it's just sarcasm so crazy. So I'm excited to get into this. We're going to jump right in. I'm going to let them introduce themselves, tell a little bit about you guys. Technically, well, you know, Richard, your ministry, but tell a little bit about your page, what you do, and yeah, then we'll go on to the first question. So Richard, go ahead and take it away, brother.
Man, first of all, thanks for having me. Looking forward to this. Yeah, I'm the Faithiest Atheist. I only have pages really on Facebook and a little bit on YouTube. My YouTube is rather pathetic. I'm going to work on that one day. So mostly Facebook. I'm hardly ever on Twitter. So it really is it's just Facebook. And I'm the kind of atheist that's not trying to make more atheists or to say that all religion is bad. Just that if religions are of human origin, there's probably I'd say better ways sometimes for some religious people to behave, and more of a pluralistic, I have more of a pluralistic vision for people, more so than trying to defeat religion or to build more atheists. And that's what I'm about. And as Pastor Jared said, I'm not afraid to just have some fun and make fun of myself too.
If we can't make fun of ourselves, then what's the point? You know, I mean, I always tell people God has a sense of humor. You just got to look around. So anyways, so let's go over to the William Meme Craig page. Go ahead and tell us about yourself, brother.
Yeah, well, first I want to say, take offense at you saying my page is full of sarcasm. I don't think I've ever said one word that's not completely serious. And I think that's evident by my profile picture, at least. That's just the surface level of it. So we can talk about that off the air, Jared. Anyways, I am Taylor. You can call me Taylor. I'm representing William Meme Craig today. Cameron Bertuzzi couldn't be here to represent it, so he told me to fill in. He was recording some interview, but you're stuck with me. Our page, William Meme Craig, if you didn't know, is a parody account of Frank Turek and his silly apologetics shenanigans. And we exist, to have fun and post really funny things. Like I think I've seen maybe one other parody apologist meme account that might be funnier than our account, and I'm not gonna tell you what it is, but there's a lot of competition out there, and we're just happy to do what we do, and we do it for free. This is free of charge. We didn't charge anyone to come on this show, and we don't charge anyone to look at the memes. It's free of charge, and I wish I made money on it, but I can't claim I do. So it's just good to post funny stuff and get on here and talk about semi-serious things. And there's been the word debate tossed around. I don't want to call it a debate. Richard's a really nice guy. I think we would really should just call it like a cage match or a bloodbath or something. Not debate though.
Yes, I think what the gladiators did would be really minor to what we're about to do this evening.
Great analogy. Yeah.
Yes. So Tonight we're going to have a lot of fun. We're going to dive into some tough questions, and there will be some blood spilt tonight, and that's okay. But I would just want to remind everyone to go check out our YouTube page for Shield Apologetics. We have YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, and also our TikTok. So, and we're starting this week on TikTok. If you want to go check that out, we're doing something to think about. It's only 15 seconds long of something to think about. Just make them really quick, really easy, stuff to think about, literally. But Shield Apologetics is an outreach ministry from Liberty Church. And so I just want to give credit to Liberty for producing this. And we're available to do this because of Liberty Church. So I'm very blessed that they are producing this. And Shield Apologetics is the outreach ministry of Liberty Church. So we're blessed there. So, all right, well, let's get in. If you guys are ready to rock and roll,
Let's do it.
All right, here we go. Does sin exist is really the topic of our talk this evening. And I'm going to let you guys go at it. So the first question, and I'm going to give Taylor the first opportunity here to go first in this. Does sin exist in your worldview? So I think the best way to describe what is your worldview, and does sin exist in your worldview, and how do you know?
Yeah, well, okay, so seriously, this is really awesome to be on here. I just found Richard's account, within the past few months. I think he's been following, William E. Craig for a while, but I just really started interacting with him. Go ahead.
I have, yes. I followed you.
So and we just, our sarcasm, snarkiness linked up, like Jared said, with their relationship, and it was just really easy to talk to Richard online about funny things. That's all we talk about on my page, but he talks about a lot of serious stuff in his page. So going over there and interacting with his stuff is really fun as well. So anyways, I just commented randomly about on a Facebook post about sin on his page, and he was telling me some interesting things about his view of sin, and I was like, well, I would really love to learn more about this. And he's like, well, let's just get on a call and get on a show and talk about this, or get on a podcast, I suppose. And I was like, well, I don't know, I don't have a show, you don't have a show, how can we do this? And then obviously Jared's here to host us, so this is awesome. So sorry, I just wanted to give you a real introduction, I guess, to how I really got here, and how grateful I am to actually do this with you, Richard. So I think my position is not surprising. It's not going to be controversial. I'm a Bible believing Christian. All of the creeds of history, mere Christianity. I'm a Protestant Christian. I don't have a lot of crazy, progressive or liberal views. So when I say yes, sin exists on my worldview, I would say a lot of people, especially in in the West, in America, probably know what I mean. It's God is good. People have fallen short of the glory of God, to quote Paul in Romans. So it's sin is a transgression against God. Sin is bad, kind of thing. I think that's maybe not a surprise to most people. So what we're really here to hear is Richard's point of view, and I'm not trying to put it all on Richard, and we're going to gang up on Richard and Paul and his view, but really,
no, that is the goal.
Well, you're not supposed to say that out loud, Jared. Come on. So I just say, it's not really interesting to hear my view. There's some nuance to what sin is. There's, people spend tons of hours and spill a lot of ink talking about sin in Christianity, obviously, but there's not really a lot of interesting or exciting developments in the doctrine of sin, coming from me, at least. There may be some crazy views out there that we could get in the weeds about, but really we want to hear what the atheist or the non-theistic view of sin is, or if there even is a view. Richard, we've kind of talked privately about it, maybe a little bit on your page too, but really I want to hear the details of your view, and honestly analyze it and talk about it. And like I said earlier, debate isn't really a good phrase for what I want to do. I really just want to talk to you about what you think, and you can ask me any question you want about my view, but really I want to hear yours. So I'll shut up, or I'll give it to Jared and he can give it to you maybe.
That's okay. I'm just going to toss it right over to Richard. Go ahead, take it, buddy.
Okay, hey, and thanks again for having me. And I just want to point out real quick, as I've been listening to WMC talking and listening to your intro, I've heard my dog bark. I've heard both of my teenage girls screaming. I've heard the neighbors knocking. So you might hear all kinds of normal house noises. So far, my wife hasn't come out and fussed at me yet, but I'm sure she will. So any of those normal house noises you guys might hear at any moment. So if
Well,
you
Richard, if you go watch our last video, you see something moving in the shadows back here.
right,
It was my cat walking back and forth over my light on the floor.
right,
And
I noticed that.
yeah, she loves the light. So as I'm talking, I was seeing this moving and I was like, what is behind me? So
Maybe it goes.
That's right. So don't worry. If something comes up, that's all right. It's all good. Don't worry about it, brother.
Okay, so yeah, to talk about sin, I do think that sin exists, but I'm not going to talk about it in terms of what I personally think of, what I think of as a sin. I'm going to try and scale back to just humanity at large, and I'm going to say, like, imagine that humans are like ants, and so we think in terms of our colonies. We might not know it, but we do see ourselves as a member of some type of colony. And so I've met people who say, well, I'm standing alone for what I believe. And in those cases, they might be loyal to some ideal or some standard, and they don't know anybody who is as fierce as they are. And so in those cases, they still kind of see a colony, but it's themselves within an ideal or an image rather than a group. But for a lot of us, we see ourselves as part of some sort of group. And then each tight group, at least each effective group, they have standards across two platforms. And one platform is morality, and the other platform is epistemology, or just some sort of intellectual analysis. And so under those two platforms, there are sins, there are violations that you can break. And if you break those norms, then you get angry, you want to correct them, you want them to learn a lesson. And the whole point is to keep everybody in line. So it's like a colony that's, they're doing their normal business, but then some ant is like, well, you know what? I don't want to do it. I'm just going to sit here and I'm not going to be a part of it. Then the other ants might go kill him, or they might, ignore him, or I guess many ants are she, but ants don't put up with that. And in fact, even if one ant that's not the queen has babies, all the ants will stop what they're doing and go kill the babies, because it's not her place to have the babies. It's the queen's place to have babies. So we could be fierce like that. Maybe not as fierce as the ants killing another ant's babies, but we can be pretty fierce when it comes to our moral and epistemic norms. And so I say that humanity, in order for humanity to live, to survive, they have to have these tight groups. We have to, what I call zealotry. And you and I, we talked about this in our last talk. I'm saying all humans are zealots to some degree. Even if I meet someone who says, I don't have any beliefs, I just go by pure facts, you won't get me to defend anything. Then I'll say, well, how important is it to you that I believe that? And he'll say, well, it's everything. You've got to believe that. So that's his zealotry. That's the thing that he's put his foot down on. And so I say that everybody has that. And I'll also say that some people's zealotry is something like, leave me alone. Let me just live my life the way I want to live, take care of what I need to take care of. Don't get me caught up in your deep discussions. But that's still a form of zealotry, even though they don't want to get into why they're zealous about it, or what their deep ideals are. They do make a stand about you leaving them alone. So I think no matter who you talk to, they're going to be zealous about something. And so I say that's an inherent part of our existence. It's just part of who we are, but not just us. Ants can be like that. Cells can be like that. I was going to show you guys a couple of books. Two books to throw at you: Secret Language of Cells and The Cheating Cell. And they talk about how at some point single cells started thinking of each other, even though they don't have neurology. They started to behave as a component of a larger organism, or a larger network, just like, all of us have all these cells, but each cell doesn't think of itself as a single cell. It thinks of as a part of our body. I'm a fingernail cell, or I'm a liver cell. So this kind of nature is at all scales of life. And I just think that humans are like that too. It's just that we also have, so we also have our narratives, and we have the way we try to make sense of life. And so maybe we don't see it that way. But I think all humans are zealots. So if Christianity is not true, then the Christians will have their version of moral violations and epistemic violations. You guys will call it sin. Muslims will have their versions of sin. Mormons will have their versions of sin. Hindus, every religion will have their view of violations, whether they call it sin or not. But even if you're not religious, even if you're a new atheist and you're just like, I've got to go correct religious people, I'm going to log on and say, hey, where's your sky daddy? Even for them, it's a sin to appeal to a God. Where is he? Show him to me. Bring him down. Bring him down. And they're angry. They're not just being mean. They're like, this is a fulfilling part of my life to go in and correct people and show that I'm strong enough to make this stand, across a keyboard. But it's still a warrior mentality. There's still zealotry. So I think that, and there's one of my kids screaming now. They're doing the same thing I'm doing. They're talking to friends online too. So everybody has a sense of sin. It's just that we might not call it that. And you'll meet a lot of atheists who say, well, there's no such thing as sin. There's just, poor behavior, or there's just dumb things you can believe in, but they're still calling it a violation. So for me, a sin is a violation of those moral norms and epistemic norms. I'm sure I have things that I'm like, hey, don't do that, and I can't justify it. I can't say that some God made it that way. It's probably a result of biology or sociology, or maybe I can't ground it as well as a religious person I can, but I feel it, I'll perceive it, and I'll get all, upset and want to fight about it. And so I think we're all like that. And so for me, that's what you would call sin, and I would just call some sort of violation that we see as, it's more important than what's your favorite ice cream flavor. So like, and this is the last thing I'll say, if you meet somebody who has a different sports team than you, or a different favorite band, or a different dessert, you're like, oh, okay, that's cool. You're not angry. You might even be intrigued by it. You might want to talk to them more. But if you meet somebody who is violating one of your sacred norms, one of your really important standards, then you get enraged. You're like, no, this won't stand. We can't move past this. We've got to talk about this until you get it right. And that's the heart of most social media arguments right there, is that two people have different standards and they just can't believe each other. And pretty soon they're both accusing each other of not understanding that torturing baby kittens for fun is really wrong, because they have different reasons as to why they think that. So you're going to get angry. You're going to want to correct them, and that's human nature. And so that's what I call the sin.
All right. Awesome. Thank you, Richard. Appreciate that. I think that really clarifies it on your position of what the standard, what position you're taking, what thought process you're taking, how it goes on a personal, but a global level, I want to call it. So Taylor, what's your response to that?
Yeah, well, I just want to clarify the standards you talked about. There's like the two branches of it, maybe you said, where it's like morality and epistemology. And you said that sin is a violation of moral and epistemic norms. And what exactly are those two branches? Like, how do you, I wasn't exactly clear as to what you meant by those two things.
Well, okay. So what I mean is that pretty much whoever you talk to, and I've heard a lot of apologists talk like this. Josh McDowell was the one, I think the first one, who really pointed this out back in the 90s. He said, no matter who you're in the room with, you keep pushing and prodding at them, you're going to find something that they stiff their back up and say, whoa, wait a minute, you can't do that. That's wrong. And up until that point, they might apathetically wave away all the, oh, you use the Lord's name in vain. And they're like, oh, you're silly God, no matter what you talk about is sin, and they're laughing at you, and they're like the Matrix. They're just moving it out of the way. It's nothing, but you'll find something that they go, oh, whoa, wait a minute. Now you're in my moral territory. You're in my, you're violating what I think is right.
Right.
And Josh McDowell is like, everybody has that. So, and whatever it is for somebody, once you've cornered somebody and you've made them angry and you've got their back against the wall and now they want to fight, what they're thinking is some moral rule or some epistemic rule or both. And for a lot of us, I think a lot of us, once you do this long enough, the morality and the epistemology becomes one interwoven framework. So it all kind of works together for some of us. But it's going to be something moral or something epistemic. And a good example of this is a guy who says that morality, doesn't exist, and that, it's just human made and it's just all opinions and preferences. And if you get worked up over it, then it's just your dumb, your ignorance. And he's like, so there's no morality, there's just epistemology. And he would tell me that. He was like, I agree with you, except for the fact that there's no moral violations, it's all epistemology. And I'm like, well, how important is it to you that I believe that? And he's like, it's everything. You've got to believe that. And I'm like, so I think maybe there might be a moral stance there, even though you're calling it epistemology. So I think no matter who you are, you're going to have something where you suddenly get enraged or you suddenly feel like it's a violation. And if you dig into it, it's going to be either moral or epistemology or both.
Right. Okay. So what, I think the morality side of it's pretty clear. What's an example of like an epistemic norm that somebody might, put their back up against or put their back up for?
One thing I see a lot on discussions between atheists and theists alike is that maybe an argument, like a classically framed argument, like, premise, conclusion. And someone will say, what do you believe? And I believe this. Well, what about this premise? Do you accept this premise? Oh yeah, I accept that. What about this premise? Do you accept this premise? Oh yeah, okay. Well, then that leads to this conclusion. And they're like, well, no, hold on, you've accepted this premise and you've accepted this premise. So you're kind of obligated to accept this conclusion. Well, no, I just don't see it that way. I think then sometimes the person who's offered the argument will say, well, I need you to be intellectually honest. And I think that phrase, intellectual honesty, is acknowledging what they perceive as an epistemic violation.
Gotcha. Okay. Right.
Because really, everything we're doing is, as we're all going throughout the day, is we're trying to communicate what we think is important, and we're hoping people agree with us on the important things, and we explain it to them. Sometimes we're throwing some moral things in there, but sometimes we're just giving them straight facts. And if people aren't following the facts, then even this is why sometimes I say they kind of get merged together. If people aren't following the facts, then you're like, well, how can I talk to you if you can't even follow the facts? So that's why I say it's either morality or epistemology or both.
Right. And at some point they do blend together. Like I gotcha.
Yeah. I think anybody who's been in this game long enough, they become the same thing. It's
Right.
all one framework.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, so I guess maybe more of a preliminary question to this conversation is, does this conversation really boil down to like moral duties and their foundation, like objective moral duties and stuff? Or is this, you consider this like are we just going to get to the point of where we're trying to say objective moral duties exist or don't exist, and here's why I think God grounds them, and here's you say something about here's why I think they're grounded on atheism? Should we just go ahead and skip to that part, or is it separate for you?
Yeah, I think we can get into it, but I think my answer will be frustrating, which is something like, what if they don't exist? What if we make them up, but we do perceive them? So it's like, I don't, like, if you find the things that make me angry, it won't be because I sat at a table and thought about what is it. There's going to be things that you say that like shock me, and I discovered them just as I'm just as surprised as you were to hear that they shocked me. So I don't think that they're things that we make up deliberately just to deceive other people. I think they're programmable. So I think we're raised in an environment, and we hear other people and we see what they find is important, and some of that is programmed into us. And so if you ask people, honestly, I think if you ask anybody if objective moral duties exist, they'll either say yes, or if they say no, you do what Josh McDowell says to do, which is keep prodding them until they get angry. And then you say, now what's that? What is that? And so then they'll say, well, this is something you obviously can't ever violate. Everybody knows that. And then you say, see, I think that's what we're talking about. So I think everybody has that. Even my friend who says it doesn't exist, he gets mad when I say that he doesn't realize that there really is. He gets mad about that. So there's something that you get mad about. Now, does that mean that there really are objective morals, or is it just something about our nature that we perceive norms? So my answer is that we definitely perceive a distinction, a sharp distinction between favorite ice creams, favorite sports bands down here, and then those norms that get us mad. Those are two separate things, and they'll never be the same. I'll never be apathetic about, should we torture baby kittens for fun? I'll always get angry about that. I'll never be like, oh, you like Judas Priest and I like Iron Maiden. It'll never be the same for me. So that distinction is something that we all perceive, but is it like an optical illusion? So that even though we've measured it and we know it's not, we know the spheres aren't the same size. When we look at it, we'll always see the spheres as different because that's just the way our brains trick us, and that's just an aspect of our natural essence, even though we don't actively try and make it that way. I would imagine that morals are probably something like an optical illusion, but we really, really mean it, and we don't really want to think of it that way, and so it makes the conversation uncomfortable. But that's probably what I think morality is really like, is something like that.
Right. Yeah. And, we don't have to get into it now. We can talk more specifically about sin first, but I was just thinking through this, this past week, and it's like everything I keep probing about, like, and going through some questions about sin, they all, when you push them a little bit deeper, it all gets down to like, what's the foundation of the moral duties that we're, all trying to live by or recognize. And it's just like, well, should I just prepare to talk about, a moral argument for God's existence or something? But I think, not that that's not important, but you can go watch another video for that. This is more interesting to me in a way, because I've never had a conversation with a non-Christian about like what their view of specifically sin is. And if we're just calling moral duties, like moral duty violations, sin, then we're just, talking about moral duty stuff with a veil of sin on it. I mean, that's okay. But I like thinking of it in terms of sin. I think that has like a connotation to it that's kind of evocative or interesting. And I don't know, if we end up just talking about moral duties and stuff at the end, that's totally fine. But I did have some questions to ask you about sin to kind of sharpen your view a little bit for me.
Sure.
And I guess you already kind of answered one of them. Well, the first obvious question is, what is it? And you say that it's a violation of the moral norms and epistemic, or the moral and epistemic norms that we have as a collective, right?
Right. And one thing right now is that, because of social media, we fractured a lot. So now a collection of sins that we all kind of agreed on is now fracturing. So now people are kind of coming up with their own, and again, it's not consciously. It's not like they're sitting around going, what's our moral norms going to be? We just sort of have some ideas bounce around until some take hold.
Right.
So yeah, right now it's more than just the United States of America has a collection of values. Now there's a lot of different groups that have different collections of values, but each one of those groups will say, so let's say I'm just going to arbitrarily pick the number 14. Let's say that we could all be divided into 14 different groups around the nation, and it's more than that. But let's say that we could. You ask each of those 14, you push somebody in each one of those 14, even if it's not religion, they'll say, look, there are some values that you just do not cross. They'll all say that, but then they'll just have different values. And so that, for me, that lends credence to my view that, hey, we're just like that. This is just who we are.
Interesting. Yeah. Do you think that it might, that there's, I don't know the word, like danger, or like I don't know, it's possible that could collapse into like individual subjective moral norms and stuff, where it's like, yeah, even in these 14 groups, there's subgroups within those groups, and subgroups within those subgroups, and then eventually you get down to where it's like every individual has like these one or two things that are different from the people next to them, but they get their back up against the wall of this moral norm or this epistemic norm that they have, and it's like, do you think that is a problem for your view, or is it just kind of something that comes with the furniture of what you're describing?
I can't nod enough. If I could nod like superhuman nod, I would nod, because that's what they're talking about, the meaning crisis, because that's exactly what happening right now. Whether atheism or Christianity is true or something else, that's exactly what's happening, is we're all fracturing into each person coming up with their own norms and their own sacred values. That's just what's happening now. And when that happens, it's going to be easier for our country to, either fall apart or fade or become sort of meaningless, so that some other thing can come in. One thing I haven't talked about so far is like natural selection or evolution. It's sort of like, for me, it's sort of like game theory. So that as important as all this is to us, you and me talking, atheists and religious people talking, it's really, really important to us. It's everything to us. But as important as that is, if some other country comes in and just starts, or a company, like I honestly think that, our future might be Amazon or Meta or something, so that we don't say we're from the United States. We'll be like, well, I'm from Amazon. Where are you from? Well, I'm from Meta. Some company or some other organization might come in and take advantage of us at this vulnerable spot that we're in and rebuild something else. And then we become, more obligated or more determined, and we identify with that more than being members of the U.S. Natural selection would let that happen. So like what the kind of labels that we're going by right now, and with technology doing what it's doing now, we could, within our lifetimes, and I'm in my 50s, but even still within my lifetime, and certainly by my kids, my two teenagers might very well grow up where Christian no longer means anything. United States might not mean as much. There might be company names. It might be something else. We're headed that way right now. We're already going that way. Christianity can be true, but if I'm right, natural selection would shrug and say, I don't care what you guys do. You could all die out for all I care. But if you're going to survive, if you're going to navigate reality correctly, you're going to have to do something like the ants, because the ants that do better are the ones that are a colony. And the ants that are like, well, I'm going to do whatever, those colonies don't make it. So we're going to have to do something where we can feel that drive together and feel that bond together. Otherwise, we are going to just be more exploitable. That's happening right now.
Right. And you called it what crisis?
Oh, the meaning crisis. You
Meaning
might see the meaning crisis. That phrase is getting thrown out. The left, the right, the religious, the atheist, everybody's talking about the meaning crisis right now. And that's actually happening. That's not me just throwing out a conspiracy theory. It's just people are starting to not feel those automatic bonds anymore. And they're feeling like they're on shakier ground, and that makes us exploitable. You might already be aware of some friends of yours that believe in some ridiculous things that has nothing to do with religion or atheism. It just narratives that don't even make sense, but they're all in, and it's because they're so unstable and they're so uncertain that they've kind of latched on to something they've heard in a podcast or a page that they found, and everyone's all in. Like, for instance, flat Earth is stronger now than it's been, I don't know how many decades, because they're bonding together and they're having these testimonies where I also used to believe in a round Earth, but then I saw the light, and then I read this, and now I see that it's all lies. That's growing because there's a sense of brotherhood and sisterhood there, which is making it grow, despite the fact that we could probably log on to a satellite and see the curvature of the Earth. It's still a growing and emerging trend right now. Hopefully it's just a trend, but because of that meaning crisis, we're exploitable, and now we're seeing all kinds of things that we probably wouldn't have seen 20 or 30 years ago.
Well, that the curvature of the Earth you'd see from the satellite is because of the fisheye lens they use, and that's just the psyop that the lizard people are putting us through, unfortunately.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, not this will get us off topic, but just to mention, I actually watched a flat Earth documentary this past week called Behind the Curve.
Yeah.
It's just like, I have no sympathy for, I have sympathy for the people who believe it. I think it's, really silly, but like, I have no sympathy for whatever. It was really interesting documentary. And the title, if you have a title that's that plays on multiple different levels like that, like it was just really good. Anyways,
there's some very, very smart people that are pushing for flat Earth now,
yeah.
Scientists and all kinds of former NASA people. But and I think a lot of that is the bonding that comes along with it. I've logged on to some of those pages. In fact, on another podcast, I was brought in a year or so ago to talk about flat Earth specifically because some of the testimonies, if you log on and see someone's testimony and all the science and all the videos and the music that they bring into it, there's some really entertaining, testimonies that kind of bring in their numbers, and suddenly people are like, oh, I'm so happy. I feel so much better now. It's because they're kind of piggybacking on that momentum.
Yeah,
Well, go
and
ahead.
this-
Go ahead, Jared.
If
yeah,
I could
go
just
ahead.
if I could just jump in real quick, one of the things I just want to mention is it's really interesting. What's cool is we're breaking right now those tribal boundaries
Yeah.
that people believe. Us right now having this podcast is breaking those boundaries of
Yeah.
separation, and I think that's something, Richard, you and I had hit on before. If we can't be isolated to each other, we can't be isolated, from each other. We need to come together regardless of our different worldviews, and I think that's vitally important. And I think that's why doing these talks is important to show people, like our whole first podcast was about how an atheist and a Christian can be friends and have a great conversation, but yet still stay friends at the end of the conversation. And I think that's important too, because what we're seeing now, and what Richard, you pointed out, and I think it's cool when it goes along the lines of morality, is we're seeing people take today, and I love how Richard, when you go through and you even address the self-defeating statements that people bring up. And when people today are attracted to certain things they just hear, and they just jump on these bandwagons many times with, it's just like TikTok. I always say there can be, in 30 seconds of a TikTok, 6 lies presented, but it takes over 3 hours to address one truth, showing
Right.
that one of those lies is defeated. And I think that's so difficult in a world today where people are many times are just believing honestly in disregard of the evidence. And I think that is, I'm going to use a moral word, I think that is dangerous. I think it's dangerous when we separate from each other. I think it's dangerous for churches to say, I don't want to have this conversation. I'm not saying churches do that. I'm just saying some places are so afraid of the conversation that they are going to now, Richard, you and I talked about this, tribal themselves off into an isolated bubble, contradicting their worldview of Christianity, of making disciples of all nations. It contradicts the position. So I just wanted to bring that up and show what we're doing right now, us three, is breaking those boundaries. And we're talking about rooted issues of whether it's epistemological positions or ontological positions of morality, and addressing those things head on. And I think everyone else needs to break those boundaries too, because just like you had said, when dealing with something of the tribal 14 that you gave the example of, the and like Taylor, you said of the 14 inside, those groups inside the 14, it's like when we look at the world itself, we can come to certain positions that we all agree on, and such as when the Nazis were prosecuted, and a world government prosecuted the Nazis, and they took care of them in that way where someone could, the Nazis, when they were prosecuted, some of them were like, well, I'm just following orders. Well, it
Right.
doesn't matter. It's still objectively morally wrong of what you did. And we all come to that conclusion. So I think those are the things that can really help us understand of what happened. Like Richard, what you just said, someone coming over and taking control, and it makes you think about what happens if the Nazis would have won, honestly, World War II, and what the world would be like. Now, does that make what they're doing right? I would say no. Regardless if they won, it's still objectively morally wrong what they're doing, regardless if they've won something or not. So that was just my intersect. Sorry, I just.
Right, yeah, and that's a good point. Yeah, and you've actually you've actually inspired me to make like 3 or 4 different comments. Just to say one last thing on the flat Earth thing is that out of all the testimonies that I've seen, as I was researching for that presentation from a year ago, none of those presentations shows a picture of the edge of the Earth, and ostensibly we're surrounded by it. Ostensibly, no matter which direction you go into, you're eventually going to run into the edge. And none of those videos do that. They just talk about normal beliefs that we have, and then what might be wrong with that, and how the media might be lying to you. And it's not like people who believe in a round Earth trust the media. They just think that the Earth is shaped like the other planets that we see in the sky. But it just goes to show you that it's not really about facts sometimes. Sometimes it's just about this bonding. So I had wanted to point about that. And then I just want to say for the Nazis, They could win something. And the reason why I'm in this ministry, the reason why I evangelize, and I use these words that you guys understand, is that something like the Nazis could win, and natural selection would shrug. If they win, natural selection will be like, well, they're still here, and they're the ones who are still here, and the people who are fighting them lost, and then the Nazis who think that their way has to be the only way, and they're going to murder people who don't agree with them, like ISIS. ISIS is a group like that right now. Then natural selection will be like, well, they're the kings now, whatever, because natural selection isn't selecting. It doesn't have a moral system. It's just watching to see who's here. I mean, even then, it's not really watching.
It just tells what happens. It's like, it just tells the obvious of survival of the fittest. It just tells what occurs.
Right.
Even like Richard Dawkins says, I'm not in favor of our Darwinian morality.
Right. Yeah. When he talks about pitiless indifference, that's natural selection. But then, if you ask him personally, he'll like, oh, well, that's morally wrong. So it's not so much a contradiction in that he's saying he's trying to take the view of natural selection, which is kind of pitiless indifference. But for him personally, he's like, well, I don't like the Nazis, right? I don't think that torturing baby kittens for fun is good. That's important to point out that, natural selection, when I talk like that, it's really just a metaphor. It's just whatever's still here is still here.
Yep, I like that. All right, so what I want to do next is, Taylor, I want you to go ahead and keep going. I didn't mean to interrupt you guys, but that was just one point I wanted to make in this whole situation. Is it's important to do what us three are doing right now. I think it's very, very important. I think it's very important to make friends who honestly disagree with you, but you can be friends. And our church right now at Liberty, we are a church that loves conversation, that will have the conversation. We believe in objective truth, absolutely. But the point is that we're willing to sit down. If you have a question, we will talk about it. We will seek truth with you and go through there. So I'll let you take it away, Taylor, if you wanted to respond.
Yeah, no, that's great. It was really easy to try to cross this border with Richard. If someone can engage you on a Facebook comment and make you want to have an actual conversation with them in real life, I think it speaks pretty well. I'm not here to just pat Richard on the back for that, but it is really awesome to see.
Don't give him any credit. Don't.
Yeah, well, he's not that great, but he's pretty good.
The atheist historian Tom Holland, not the Marvel Tom Holland, but the atheist historian Tom Holland says we all swim in Christian waters, at least over here in Europe and in the US. Our language, the way we talk, the idea that people on the ground should have some sort of say and not the elites. Those were all kind of alien to history until Christians introduced that concept. So whatever nice things you want to say about me, you could still say, well, I'm borrowing from Christianity when I do those things.
Yeah, you're just the Frank Turek line. You're sitting on God's lap to slap him in the face, Richard. How dare you?
Yeah.
Don't you pay us a compliment. Don't you butter us up.
Okay, sorry. My question's about sin on your position. So one interesting one so when you think of Christianity, sin on Christianity, it's like there's sin is pretty clearly like transgressing against God or transgressing against God's law. You're like violating his law in some way. He's giving you a command, or you have some kind of you see a command in special revelation like the Bible, and you break it, and now you're a sinner. Or even the possibility of you breaking kind of the natural the natural law that we have written on our hearts, like Paul says. It's you know it's wrong to do something in your heart, you do it anyways, and you're a sinner. So it's easy to kind of have a concept of what a sinner is, and then therefore you have a good idea of what the opposite of a sinner is on the Christian worldview. It would just be like righteousness or being God-like, God-esque, not God-like in the sense of being like God's attributes of infinite power and knowledge or whatever, but being close, like approximating God's moral character better would be the opposite of being sinful. approaching his goodness is moving in the opposite direction. So you're a righteous person, you're a holy person, maybe you could say. So what would be the opposite of sinfulness on your view? What do you think?
For me personally, what I might come up with would probably be heresy to another atheist. So I don't know that there's an atheist version of what you guys have. Maybe for atheists, the biggest thing we would fight, like if there was no Christians left for us to argue with, and we just argued with each other, there might be a camp of atheists who say atheism has to mean lack of belief, and another camp that says no, atheism has to mean the declaration that there are no deities. And so maybe that would be the norm, that we just can't, and so there's no religious people, and so atheists just start fighting each other over that one thing. So I don't know that there's one for atheism like that, but I will say something that probably should make Christians worry is that you guys don't really agree as much as you think. There's a lot of Christians who are like, hey, some people are so fundamental and they're kind of isolating themselves, and we're going to open ourselves up and listen and not judge so quickly and listen and learn. There's Christians who call that weakness. They're like, you guys have abandoned God. You've fallen into your worldliness, and even though you might not call yourselves liberals, they're still going to say it. They're still going to. I mean, I've and I don't even want to throw out some of the apologist pages without them being here, but I've seen some apologist pages that condemn that kind of activity of listening and opening up, and they need to learn. They're violators. They need to understand that they're wrong. They need to be condemned. This isn't a give and take session. This is them learning, or either learning through us or learning the hard way, and no more Mr. Nice Guy. So you guys have that to contend with, and the people who do that, they see themselves as super righteous. They're like, hey, I'm just following the prescription here. I'm just following the orders. I'm not being mean. I'm tilting my head down. The text is telling me I've got marching orders, and this is not about Mr. Nice Guy. This is about letting people know the truth. And I think that happens probably with a lot of different groups, not just Christians. But I don't really see a unified Christianity, and maybe there's never been a unified Christianity. Maybe not even by the time Paul was talking about what he saw in his vision, just 20 years or so after the events of Jesus. Maybe even by then there was fractions or factions. Factions.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know that there really is a unified Christianity. So it's something to point out that if Christianity isn't true and these are people coming up with their own rules, so far there's some Christians who are like, hey, we need to take the consideration of others more seriously, and you have some people who say, no, we need to smack down the violators and let people know the way things ought to be. I think that tension has probably existed from the beginning of time, or beginning of Christianity anyway.
You mean like Christians viewing, like, sorry, how does that relate to sin? Like the Christian view of sin?
Well, so in each case, someone who's trying to open up and listen to people who aren't Christian and trying to engage with them without immediately chastising them, that person would probably see it as a sin for a fundamentalist to just keep screaming like, you're going to hell, you're going to hell. Then the more open Christian would say, well, you've kind of fallen into this sin of self-righteousness where you're kind of isolating yourself, and you need to back up and read scripture about how Jesus engaged with people. Whereas the fundamentalist who's screaming is saying, no, you're sinning because you're staining yourself with all their filth, and you're following into their secular TV shows, and you're spreading memes that make sense to them because you're using their stained language. They would see you as a sinner. So I think that sort of backs up what I was saying, is that this idea of violations is programmable, so that you could both still call yourself Christians, but you both see each other as being sinful because you're approaching it in different ways that the other finds offensive.
Right. Well, I don't know if I would really have a problem with that, or like consider it. I don't know. Maybe threat's a strong word for what you're talking about, but like a threat to Christianity, or like a unified church is ideal, but I think it was even I think I would agree with you and just concede that there really wasn't ever a unified church. There was dissension among the disciples when Jesus was with them. So it's like, even after the church started, after Jesus's ascension or whatever, it's like, okay, there's still going to be factions, whatever. But I think the core kind of mere Christianity stuff is what would make someone a Christian, not necessarily what they believe about these peripheral or secondary, or maybe even like really important secondary issues of what approach should you use when talking to the heathens. What I don't I'm not sure that it's that big of a deal, but it's definitely not. I mean, it's definitely a concern. I'm in agreement with you that if people are saying, if someone is saying that it's a sin to engage one way or another with someone, they're probably being an extremist about what that they're being overzealous about what that moral norm is,
Right.
for them, and so they're just out of line with what actual Christianity teaches. So I don't know. I don't want to bring it down to like no true Christian fallacy or anything, but it's like that's not that big of a deal to me, I guess.
I see.
Yeah, I would agree too. I think it all comes back to, even Paul says, I forget everything but Christ crucified. If
I wanted
you
to
know,
bring that up actually. That's Paul's thing, what you just said. In
Yeah.
fact, he even talks about the other disciples, and although he says they're nothing to me, I don't think that he's actually dismissing them. I think what he's saying is there's nothing they can say that's going to take me away from Christ crucified. All I
Right.
know is Christ crucified.
Yeah. And
That's Paul's thing.
And I think that's the singularity that holds it all together. There can be many disagreements, and that's why when people get hurt in the church, I always tell people hurt you. Jesus didn't hurt you. People hurt you. And that's like saying if someone says, because what happens so many times in this situation is so many times people will blame God for people hurting him. And that's like me blaming someone. I'm a huge fan of John Williams. He does all the scores for Star Wars, Jaws, all these wonderful things. That's like me blaming someone playing John Williams on a piano and saying, you're not doing it right. That's like me blaming John Williams. That's not John Williams' fault. That's the person who's conducting, the music. And so I think that's important too, because I agree with you. I think Taylor and I will fall in agreement of that, to say, yes, there are disagreements, but are those salvation issues? And I think that's the big question. Are those salvation issues? Because here's the big problem I have. The big problem I have is, for example, and again, I'm going to get a lot of people mad at me. And Taylor, I don't know your view on this, so if you disagree with me, we're just going to confirm that. But I disagree wholeheartedly with answers in Genesis, ministry. I'm going to be honest with you. And Richard, you and I talked about this last time. The Creation Museum, my wife and I went there, and there's so many problems I see. So many problems of how reading the text. So many problems of how they're interpreting it. And also, one of the biggest problems I have is it's almost being so dogmatic that it's almost saying, if you don't believe in literal 6 days, 24 hours, if you don't believe that, then you're not a Christian.
That's exactly right. They do see it as a sin. If you're old earth, they see that as a sin.
Right. So I don't know if you
at least a lot of people do.
Right. And that's the big problem I have. That's my concern. But like I said last time, God, if you've chosen Jesus here in this life, and then when you get to heaven, he's not going to ask you, did you think the universe was old or young? He's not going to ask you that. He's not going to ask you, did you think Genesis, the 6 days, was 24 hours or not? Those are things that are fun to discuss among atheists, among Christians. It's fun to discuss. But when it comes down to the nitty gritty, I forget everything but Christ crucified. If Jesus, that's what I love about Christianity so much. And you prove that one thing wrong and the whole thing is down the toilet, I think is important. So Taylor, go ahead if you want to respond to that, buddy.
No, yep, sounds great.
Say the yep again. What was that? Yep. But I think that's important. I think it points us to something true, where we can all agree that type of situation of dogmatism of saying you have to take Genesis this way. And when you're interpreting Genesis incorrectly, and I had this discussion recently with someone on my Facebook where they said, I said there's one interpretation and every other interpretation is false. They said, yeah, but some interpretations are false. I said, correct, which would mean there is a correct interpretation. But to have that correct interpretation, it's the author and the receiver. That's the interpretation we must receive from Scripture. Scripture, from beginning to end, is completely a position where we have the technically, if we're looking at it, it's not written to us, it's written for us. And so when we're looking at Scripture and people are interpreting in their perspective, what I call eisegesising, they're reading into the text something in their life, and then they're moving into the world and applying it to people falsely. And that's why Jesus, when he shows up on the scene, he goes right after the religious leaders of the day. He goes right after them, and he even addresses it. He says, you have forgotten the weightier matters of the law. You've tithed mint, dill, and cumin, but you've forgotten the most important things: justice, mercy, and faithfulness. So Jesus is addressing with them, you guys have messed up when it comes to my law and what it is. And you guys are taking it however you want it, rather than taking it the way the author and the receiver in their interpretation of that passage is supposed to be.
And notice that's somebody addressing other religious people and saying what you're doing is a violation of the way things should be.
Right.
Right.
So
Yeah.
I'm gonna go ahead, Taylor.
Well, I was going to ask what we're approaching an hour. Or have we already met an hour? What's our time here?
Not yet. We
Okay.
got about 15. We got 20 minutes because we started.
Oh.
Yep, we're good.
Okay.
Yep, we're good.
Okay. Well, I guess I wanted to. One of the more interesting questions I thought about was, what about, on your view, Richard? Do people have these kind of obligations when they're alone? Like, is there any intra? Is there any internal obligation that you have alone? If you were the only person to exist, would you still have oughts and shoulds
Yeah.
to consider, or is it just interpersonal where it only comes into play when there's other people involved?
In my opinion, we all have that perception of oughts and shoulds. We all have it. And so even if we're not caught, we would still say, yeah, but it's still wrong for me to do that. So we all have that perception. Some people might say, okay, but yeah, I really like margaritas, so I'm gonna have too many tonight or whatever, depending if they think that that's wrong. I think some people might do it anyway, but still feel a little guilty. So I think that we all do perceive those oughts and shoulds, but is that perception based on something real or just something that we honestly think is there? And I don't know, but I do think that, just like ants, when ants do something together as a colony, they are following chemicals. So there's something to be said. And when cells, this book really gets into it. The book I showed earlier about, there's a bioelectric language between cells that scientists don't even know where it comes from, but they're so good at it now that they can go to an organism that, maybe loses a leg and it doesn't have regeneration in its DNA, but they can make the cells talk to each other to where it can at least grow something like a leg now, because they've hacked into that language. So our scientists can hack into this bioelectric language between cells, even though they don't know where it's coming from. So there's something, some amazing stuff going on just at the cell level, some sort of chemicals or something that's making these cells communicate, that makes ants communicate. So I think there's powerful chemicals involved that drive us towards something like oughts and shoulds. But is that because there really is an oughts and should, or is it because that we're just the kind of life forms or the kind of forms that some chemicals just make us do it, and then we do it and then go back and tell ourselves later, we go and tell ourselves something that we can live with. And I worry that it might be that we do it first. There's some chemicals just make us do things, and then we go back and tell ourselves later a story we can live with. And so it could be that the oughts and shoulds are just like extra doses of certainty that really are compelling, but maybe not are based on actual set of laws that are separate from us.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
And I don't recommend that we all just drop it, because I think we can't drop it. I would say we try to come up with something that we can live with. But I suspect that there's not somebody watching. Of course, I'm an atheist, but I think that there's not some monitor watching us that has an objective set of oughts and shoulds.
Okay, well, so what are the consequences of sin then? Like what
Right.
Yeah, I think that's a good simple question.
Right. So yeah, like, I was raised Southern Baptist. And so, my pastor, especially when we were in a youth group and we were in our preteens and teens, our pastor and our youth pastor would say, there's going to be times when you guys are alone, but, there's some consequences if you guys do, these certain activities when nobody's watching, and this could have eternal, consequences for you. Maybe you get away with it now, but if you're unrepentant, you could end up suffering for that later in life. And of course, this was 1970s rural Georgia, so they said it a lot more sternly than that. But there were these consequences that were going to come eventually. And so maybe under atheism, there's not those eternal consequences. But then again, if someone walks around and just does whatever they want to do, in our culture, for the most part, the world stops them silly. It doesn't always happen. There's some cases where someone rises to a level of authority where he can or she can kind of do whatever she wants. And then there's other people who feel compelled to follow them and just kind of support that, which is what happened with Nazism. Hitler wasn't brilliant. There was although he was fairly capable, there were just a lot of people who thought that there should be something like a Third Reich, something like an authority that was a dominant species. And Hitler surfed on that and took advantage of it. And with the exception of things like that, usually if someone does whatever they want, the rest of the society kind of knocks them down. So, and that's part of zealotry. I always say that in society, you have selfish people, and then you have kind of generally cooperative people, and then you have kind of fiercely zealous people. But if somebody is taking too much for themselves, usually everybody else kind of comes in and knocks them back and says, okay, that's enough. I don't know if you guys ever watched Little House on the Prairie.
Yeah.
But in Little House on the Prairie, there was 3 brothers that come into town, and the younger brother goes into school and he's pushing around the kids, and the 2 adults are like taking things from the store and grabbing people's wives. And the town does everything they can to try and deal with them, until finally everybody in the town just gets them and just grabs them by the collar,
Right.
and throws them out and sings hymns while they do it.
Yeah.
I think that's, even though it's a fictional story, I think something like that happens, so that there are consequences for being completely selfish, with the exception of those times when someone has a bunch of enablers or worshipers, in which case selfishness can really lead to a lot of problems.
Right. Well, so what do you think that it's possible? Is it legitimate to judge another group from within your group's moral and epistemic norms? Like, I think us as an American group, us 3, and then plus all the other Americans, or I don't know, people who are not Nazis. I'm just going to make a wild assumption about both of you guys, but as people who are not personally part of the Nazi movement, is it appropriate, or is it like
Justified?
Yeah. Is it justified to look at another group and make a judgment, a moral judgment about that?
Well,
how does that work?
Okay, so here's what I think about that. Let's say that ISIS starts to, because ISIS is sort of the modern day Nazis, even though they're nowhere near as powerful as them. But they have the exact same ideology, which is we're superior, we're the ones closer to God, and everybody needs to be like us, and we need to be in charge of everything. And they're absolutely, convinced that needs to happen. So let's say they start to take over countries, and they're heading this way. And so we over here in the United States start to form up what we're going to do about it. But as we're doing that, some aliens from another dimension come down and they say, just so you know, everything is chemicals. Nobody's watching. We only stopped by just because we were passing through. We can tell you right now that ISIS is going by chemicals and you guys are going by chemicals. So there is no ultimate authority. At the end of this, we're not even going to help you. At the end of this, either you guys are going to stop ISIS or they're going to overtake you, and nothing in the universe is going to care one way or the other until the universe expands into nothingness. So all you really got to deal with is the rest of your lives and the lives of your loved ones. And that's it. And we can verify this for you. Would you just sit down and say, okay, well, never mind? Or would you keep fighting? So I would just shrug that off because it's what I think anyway. I would still feel compelled to fight ISIS, but just for my family or just for my peace of mind, I'd still do it, even if atheist aliens were confirming that nobody's watching and they could show us. Let's just say there's some way for them to show us, it wouldn't change anything for me. And I honestly think that a lot of Christians would probably take a step back and say, okay, but meanwhile, let's stop this because this is an immediate threat and we need to stop it. And they would fight just as fiercely. That's my guess what a lot of Christians will do. But what would you do?
Well, I think first I'd like to run the contingency argument by these aliens and see what they think of it. That would be my first move.
They could say, okay, good point. You're not the first race to bring this up to us. Where did we come from? What keeps us up at night? You're right about that. But
well, especially go ahead. I'm sorry.
So they might say, Josh Rasmussen already told us this, and we don't know what to say. So it's a great point. But we can tell you that we have watched your world, and nobody ever came back from the dead. We can show you who wrote the Gospels, how that happened. We can show you their entire lives. We can take you to anybody who's ever been crucified. We can show you any point in history. None of that happened. And if somebody's watching, then he's just so hidden that even we can't find him.
Well,
but would you say, okay, whether you could cling to that or not, that maybe something created those aliens, but would you give up fighting against ISIS, or would you lose all hope?
Yeah, the questions, you might be able to hear my son there. The questions of, what would I do? Who knows what you really would do in any circumstance, but, just sitting here thinking about it from the comfort of my computer desk, it's like,
Right.
I would like to think that I would still, I'm even reconsidering using the phrase, but like do the right thing, because at that point, I don't know what I would think about what the right thing really is. I think it probably would realistically come down to self-preservation, and it would be like, America, the West, it's for the most part working as a society. It's maybe in a downward part of the graph, but it's working still. So
Right.
I want to conserve that on a larger scale. I want to conserve my family unit on a smaller scale. I want to conserve my life on the smallest scale. So ISIS is a threat to that. So yeah, if I don't have to personally fight them, that's great. But I'll pay some taxes so my society's military can go do it. So I think that would be. I don't think I would consider it a morally good thing at that point. I don't think I would consider it like a righteous or like a non-sinful thing to not do it. But I'm kind of getting in my own head about like what would I do, and hypothetical counterfactuals. But yeah, that's an interesting way to ask it.
Well,
Yeah.
I have one point to the whole thing. The only issue I have is if we're all chemicals, there's no free will or understanding. Even if the aliens said, well, you guys are all chemicals, you're just reacting, there's no free will. So how can I even know what I just saw is real? Am I even real? Am I even a person? Those are the consequences that comes up. And even I'm using a moral word, consequences that comes up. But yet if we're not free creatures and we're just reacting, or as Richard Dawkins says, dancing to our DNA, then there is no right and wrong. There is no such thing as I'm going to do good or I'm going to fight against evil, or I'm going to why protect your family? Why do these things? I think the ontological position, maybe we can do it on another video. I think the ontological position, is the most important in that circumstance, because what we're trying to do, we're almost trying to live in a world where we have to put away this. I don't want to call it an instinct, because I had this discussion with my friend who's an agnostic, and he said, Jared, we have instinct. And I wasn't too familiar with answering him at the time until I dove into more C.S. Lewis when he talked about instinct and he talked about morality. Instinct, when you see a burning building and people inside, instinct says run away and save yourself. Morality says go risk your life to save those people. And I think those are the two different ways that we can view this, and the taking out the position of there being no free will, with us just reacting. We're, I like Frank Turk's molecular machines in this situation. There's no free will. We're just dancing.
So if hypothetically speaking, let's say those same aliens say, okay, we can confirm that you don't have any free will, because we're going to take you into this room and we're going to show you, or we're going to write down exactly what you're about to do. And then no matter what you do, they're always ahead of you, because we know exactly what you're going to do. So knowing that, are you going to stop fighting and just say, okay, never mind, even though technically you're right, or maybe underneath your worldview, there's no reason to take care of your family and no reason to keep fighting? Would you just do it out of stubbornness? Would you keep fighting anyway? Or would you just sit down and give up?
Well, I think even in that position is still the basis of truth, that what we're assuming that the aliens, what they're telling us is true, but the basis of truth has to be an objective standard. And if we don't have any free will, there's no objective standard that I could go by if I'm just a molecular machine.
But how would that affect your decision for the next day? So like the next day, the US is like, okay, tomorrow we're all going to meet on Zoom and we're all going to talk about how we're going to handle ISIS. And if you don't want to be a part of it, just stay home, right? And just close your computer. Would you log in the next day, or would you sit it out?
Well, see, even in that situation, it's almost like, have you guys ever seen the movie? I've not seen them, but I think this is a good example. The Purge movies.
I never saw them, but I know what you mean.
I've never seen them, but I've read about them. And I think this is a good example of us trying to remove something that's, I think it's difficult for us to answer this. Because it'd be like if I asked you the question, Richard, how would you act if God existed and Christianity were true? It'd be difficult.
Well, I would just follow orders. I might be depressed though. I might be like, I had all these thoughts about the way the world works. And now I realize that it's actually a lot more simple than that. And so, yeah, I got to do this.
So I think in this scenario, and Taylor, I'm going to have you jump in and we're going to finish up. But I think this scenario, is trying to live outside of a world that is hard to even describe without truth, describe without even free will. It seems like almost logical contradictions. There was a debate I watched a couple of years ago with Dr. Sean McDowell. He debated a guy who wrote, an atheist, who wrote a book called A Year Away from God. And Sean brought up the greatest, comment back to him. He says, imagine if I lived a life a year away from my wife, what would happen to me? And he brought up that position, and he's like, well, I try to live away from God. He says, but the moment you're trying to live away from God is the moment that you're trying to ignore certain things or certain elements, or stealing certain things from his worldview to argue against him. And I think us to remove this intrinsic moral standard, and correct me if I'm wrong, Richard, if you would agree with me on this, but I think us putting ourselves in that scenario of the purge, if we want to put it that way, of removing this objective moral standard, if there were no rules, if there were no this, if there were no that, would we still fight for what is quote unquote right or good, or fight against evil and what we would use? Or would we stand off and not fight at all and say, hey, just forget the whole thing, and we're just going to sit and lock our doors and nothing will happen? I think in those scenarios, I think we have to even remove ourselves completely from from reality itself, to almost live in an imagination, to make a decision to say, I would do this or I would do that if that scenario came up. Because then we're saying, let's remove our intrinsic objective moral standard that's built inside of us. Richard, I think you would say it's, the epistemological position of, going forward, and there's some type of morality there. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Well, it's just a natural perception of morality that might not be based on something external to us. It might just be part of who we are.
Right. And so it's trying to remove that completely, to say, okay, if you didn't love your family, would you take care of your family? It's like, I don't know. I love my family. So how, it's hard for me to answer. If I didn't love my family, how would I take care of my family? I don't know. I'm probably explaining it poorly, but Yeah, I think that's the best in that scenario of what we can try to conceptualize in that scenario of what could be the best outcome. Even I'm using moral words in a reality we're describing that there is no morality, there is no truth, and to use those words to describe this ultimate reality is difficult, if that makes sense.
All right, because I was in the Marines, I guess I might have had some experiences where I just felt cornered, and we had to do something or not do something, and so then you could tell me, well, you're self-contradicting yourself. You've removed this or you've removed that, but meanwhile, in 15 seconds, you've got to do something, or somebody near you is going to get hurt, or you're going to get hurt. I just do it. And maybe it's full of contradictions. Maybe morality is all made up. Maybe the bonding that I felt with the other Marines, maybe my determination to do something is all an illusion. But even so, I shrugged that off and just did it. And it's like that in the Game of Thrones, when the warrior is talking about philosophy, they've got a battle to go to tomorrow. And he's like, I'm going to be at the battle. And someone's asking him philosophical questions. And he says, these are wise questions, or these are questions for wise men with skinny arms. In other words, you've raised some good points, but I'm going to be there to do the thing tomorrow, even if it's, philosophically unsound. For me, it would be easy. ISIS is coming. I'm going to fight for my family, or the purge is happening. I'm going to protect my family. I'm not going to go attack other houses, but I'm going to protect my family.
And that's the answer. And that's the answer I would go with. Like, that would be my answer. And that's what I mean. It's trying to live in a world without the, the worldview, what I consider the worldview of theism or Christianity, and saying God doesn't exist. So therefore what Taylor and I come to the conclusion that we live in that worldview, and we stand on those principles, and we stand for what is right. And that, and within what I'm saying is an external force of God, and we would do the same thing as you, of do the right thing. But I think their difference is in your position of just doing it, compared to in ours, we're saying, well, it's hard to pull ourselves out to say, what would we do if this wasn't there? Right now, answering, I would do the right thing, if that makes sense.
Yes.
So, Taylor, do you have anything else you want to add, buddy?
Yeah, well, there's all kinds of good rabbit trails that we have avoided successfully, and I want to bring all of them up right at the very end. So, I just really, like, I have this feeling, like this intuition that this concept of sin without a theistic worldview doesn't make sense to me. But when I hear you talking about it, Richard, it's like, like this is a good description of what your beliefs are about reality, what really exists, and how we operate within the world we are confronted with. So it's like, I'm not saying what you're talking about is irrational or unreasonable, but it's just I have this. It just strikes me as weird to talk about oughts and shoulds if, I mean, this just gets back to what I was saying at the beginning. This is really just reduced down to the ontological status of moral duties. And I don't really know how to think about obligations in a world where, the only source of our thoughts and behavior are chemicals and illusions. And it really kind of strikes me as not merely an illusion, but kind of delusory in a sense. I'm not saying you're a delusional person, but like in
I
a
do.
technical sense.
I think part of our human nature is fooling ourselves and successfully fooling ourselves. So if that's delusion, then I'm deluded.
Right.
That's one of the reasons why I call myself the Faithiest Atheist, is because everything I'm saying, someone can say, well, that applies to you too. And I'm like, well, I'm owning that because I'm the Faithiest Atheist. I just accept these man-made tenets that I've come up with on my own, and I'm running with them as if they're objectively true. So I just think that's kind of who we are.
Yeah, well, your concession of that is like admirable. Like, you don't see people too often who are willing to just be honest about that. And it's not like, I don't know, it's not like you get a a cookie for doing that or anything. It's just,
I
that's how
want,
you feel like you should live. So that's
You get a gold star, Richard. That's what you get.
I would like a cookie at some point, but
we can arrange that. That's fine. We'll talk to Jared after this.
one thing I wanted to bring up, two more. I won't do 2 books again, I promise. This is my last time doing 2 books. This book, Until the End of Time by Brian Greene, and Return of the God Hypothesis by Stephen Meyer. Both books almost give the exact same science, from the smallest to the largest, from the cosmic scale down to the, to the quantum world. They pretty much give the exact same science, but each author has a completely different idea of how meaning can work. And for Stephen Meyer, it has to be from an external God. It has to be from a source outside of us that we can all discover. It applies to all 8 billion of us and the billion that came before us. All of those people can find the exact same meaning because it comes from that same source. And Stephen Meyer says it's got to be that way or it don't count. It's not really meaning. Whereas Brian Greene, the atheist, says it's got to be limited to within our own experiences. It's got to be able to go the other way. If you don't back it up, it's going to go the other way and you could lose it. It's got to be so limited that it will go away when you go away. So the limitedness of it is what gives it actual meaning. And then Brian Greene says, if it was from an external source, it wouldn't count because then we wouldn't have any choice. We would just have to go with that. So each man is absolutely adamant that meaning has to work in their way. And each of those ways are completely contradictory to each other. However, they both come up with the same science. They both will give you the same. There's very little difference in the science in either one of these books, but they both have different ideas of meaning. So I think for you, Taylor, the alts and shoulds have to be that external source that's available to all of us. And for me, the alts and shoulds have to do with our experiences and our surroundings, and they're limited and maybe not based on something outside of us, but they still drive us. They still give us our driving force. They just work differently. The way I see it and the way you see it are completely at odds, but we agree that they exist just in different ways.
Yeah, and like this conversation wasn't about like Richard and I disagree on what is sin, what is a sin and what's not a sin. I mean, I probably maybe have a larger pool of sins that I am thinking of because I'm thinking of like specific revelation in the Bible and stuff. And then, but it's not like you and I disagree about, a huge subset of these sins.
Right.
And so we're not really, we're dealing with the same data, like the 2 authors you just mentioned.
Yeah.
And maybe we have some different presuppositions and we're definitely coming to different conclusions, but it's like this conversation is, it really comes down to what is fundamentally true of reality. Because if God exists, I mean, like you say, we really don't have an option. Like he just gets, for like not a technical way of describing it, he just gets to describe, or he gets to decide what's true of morality, what is sin. But if God doesn't exist, it really is. I guess I'm not really clear about what you believe about objective moral duties. Did you say these are objective or they're subjective?
Well, it's the perception of objective, but if they're not based on anything external, then it is a delusion. But it is the perception. Everybody gets to a point where their back straightens up and they get angry. So we definitely perceive it. But if it's not based on something else, then it's just something about us rather than something that exists separate from us.
Right.
And go ahead, Taylor. I'm going to let you finish.
Well, I was just going to say, probably for another conversation, if you want to do it, I want to get your ideas and opinions about the evolutionary argument against naturalism. That's like where my mind wants to go.
Oh, I can't wait for that.
Yeah, is there a defeater for this? But well, I can't. I'm not an expert on it. I've read a little bit on it, and it's just fascinating. And so I would really like to pick your brain about it. So
sure,
that's where my mind was going to. I'm going to be honest. That's where my mind was going to. So
then we have our second round.
That's right. So I don't mean to cut us off, but I want us to keep going. I know people are probably listening to this wanting more. And again, if you listen to this and you're like, but you didn't answer that, we're not going to be able to answer everything. These are just a lot of good discussions on the table of many different types of issues regarding sin, morality, the ontological argument leading to epistemology. I think these are really good positions to be able to lead us into better discussions even in the future. So did you guys want to say anything real quick before we get done?
For me, just if anybody has any questions that they think I didn't answer, come to my Facebook page, if you do Facebook.
Yeah, and for me, if you have any questions that you think we didn't answer, go to his Facebook page, because I don't want anything to do with you. And I was an atheist the whole time. I tricked you.
That's sinful. What you just did was sin.
But, and same thing with me, guys. If you guys have any questions at all, you can come on our Facebook page, go on our YouTube channel, go on our TikTok, Instagram, or Twitter. And you can look up Shield Apologetics, and it stands for Sharing His Identity, Evidentially Leading Doubters. I'm so blessed to have my two friends with me here on this wonderful talk, wonderful video. Richard and Taylor, thank you guys so much for coming on the podcast today. And we're going to do this again, and we're going to talk about and define this even more and dive more into this, because I think this was a helpful discussion. I think this was good introductory discussion. I think introductions sometimes take an hour. So I think this was a good introductory discussion of diving into a deeper, I think more gritty discussion later. So thank you guys so much for coming on the podcast. I appreciate you guys so very much, and I'm blessed to have you guys as my friends. But I just want to thank everyone for watching. Make sure, like I said, to tune in, go to Shield Apologetics on YouTube and check this out. But I hope you guys have a wonderful night. Be kind to each other, love each other, find a friend who disagrees with you, and have a good conversation. And you'll see a wonderful friendship build from that. So I hope you guys have a wonderful evening. Thank you again for tuning into Shield Apologetics, Sharing His Identity, Evidentially Leading Doubters, and we will see you guys next time. We'll see you later.